Hello and welcome to Bookish and Unbalanced, the podcast that talks all about the good, the bad, the ugly and the beautiful of mental health in the queer book community. I'm Amy Spencer.
And I'm Katie Trapp.
And I'm Adrienne J. Smith.
From authors, editors, publishers, readers and reviewers, we all have a state of mental health and neglect talking about it, or worse yet, we're ashamed to talk about it. So let's break that stigma. On today's episode, we're interviewing the author, Jacqueline Ramsden. Hi, Jacqueline.
Hello.
So first off, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself as an author?
Sure. So I write mostly contemporary sapphic romance, usually characters who are dealing with difficult families and mental health issues, and quite often characters who are demisexual or non-binary, because I am demisexual and non-binary.
Could you tell us about your expertise in mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't get a diagnosis for my mental health until I was an adult. But basically now I'm very much aware that for my entire life, I had anxiety, and a lot of experiences, probably is the right word, that led to trauma. And so was an incredibly anxious child and teenager, just didn't realize it, and nobody around me realized it. Then as an adult, I was like, oh, this isn't everybody else's experience of the world, and I should probably seek some help. Went to a therapist for anxiety, was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and social phobia or social anxiety. Then saw a different therapist who didn't use the word diagnosis because they were a therapist who wasn't super interested in applying labels to their clients. But it became very apparent that trauma was a huge part of my experience. And yeah, then switched to a trauma therapist and now have diagnoses in anxiety and CPTSD.
I'm noticing a theme as we continue to interview people. It's very much a delayed diagnosis into adulthood. And I do wonder if some of that is just with the dawn of psychology and psychopathy and the research going into it, right? And the expansion of just talking about mental health in general. So like I also have CPTSD. I've never actually been diagnosed, but if you look at everything, yes, I have CPTSD. But like my first experience of a trauma counselor was when I was 19. I was just thinking about this the other night and I was like, wow, what would it have been like to see a trauma specialist when I was like 5? I think my world would have blown up. It would have been amazing. I mean, do you see any of those like themes or patterns just in your life and with the people that you're in contact with at all?
Yeah, for sure. I think that people around me who are my age are getting diagnoses definitely later in life, and then are more open to talking about their mental health. But we all had this experience where nobody was talking about it when we were kids, or if they were talking about it, it was this secret thing that we don't really address. Whereas I think that kids that I know are getting their needs met much earlier. And I agree, I think it would have completely changed my whole life and probably who I am as a person to have seen a therapist earlier. And I don't know if it's the same for you, Amy, but I grew up in the UK, and when I was growing up, therapy was this thing that Americans did. And it was like, everybody in America is seeing a therapist. There's something wrong with all of them. And then I moved to America and I was like, no, we all need to see a therapist, and I'm going to go see a therapist.
Is this the one thing Americans do right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm not even joking. access to therapy or any kind of like talking therapy, anything like that, just seems much more easily accessible and easily accepted in the States than it does over here. Like it's and I'm not sure which is kind of like the main contributing factor to the thing, but there's just whether it's difficult to access and therefore less people are willing to try to access it, or it's difficult to access because no one wants to try to access it. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm not sure which was the thing that it's a bit chicken and egg. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it's even now, like, yeah, it's still you will very rarely hear this like dropped into conversation. Oh yeah, I went to see my therapist today. That's just not a thing.
That's so interesting. So I think I can't remember if it was you that I was talking to, Amy, or if it was somebody else. And if it was, it's an American living in the UK, just about the system in terms of ending up with a therapist in the UK. And it's so vastly different than it is here in the States. And my mind was kind of blown because I think they said that they get like 9 visits and that's it. Does that sound right?
I don't think it was me you had that conversation with, but I think it definitely depends on like how you access it and stuff.
Because like I'm sitting here going, I don't think I could accomplish anything in 9 visits. Like it takes me 9 visits just to warm up to the therapist and say hi without freaking out. Like I don't know, like it is so different just to see it in different countries and different cultures, but then also in different generations, right? I think I'm making the assumption, Jacqueline, that you are roughly my age. And so like, I think millennials in general tend to be much more open to talking about mental health. And oh yeah, I've had anxiety my entire life. That explains all of these things from like age 3 to now. And I don't know, I definitely derailed this conversation, so I apologize.
No, I think you're spot on.
Yeah, I don't think you derailed it at all, because the one thing I was thinking of when Jacqueline was talking was like we're the generation where mental health in children and younger people was minimized and pinpointed on a certain thing. Like, oh, they're a kid and they're having a rough time because their parents are split up. They're bound to be playing up. Not, oh, actually, this could be having a severe impact on their long-term mental health. And now we're the generation who are going, actually, no, I have a mental health condition, or I have anxiety or depression or CPTSD, and it's been there for years, but it's only now that we're realizing, because when we were children it was minimized.
We're the whole generation that has to play catch up.
They don't want to play catch up. We're the ones going to the binder saying, here's all your mental illnesses, because we have our anyway. So in your blog post that you wrote up for Amy's, what are we calling it? Like blogathon about mental health awareness, which was
a what?
I don't know what to call it. It's really a blog hop. So it's really a blogathon for mental health awareness, which was in October. You spoke about CPTSD, and that's a newer term. I remember having a very distinct conversation with my husband about what CPTSD was, because he's like, my therapist says I'm diagnosed with CPTSD. And I was like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. And he's like, I didn't see anything. And I was like, again, yeah, no joke. But it's a newer term, and I'd love if you could just share about your understanding of what CPTSD is and how it helps you to have that label or that title, and in some ways how the label and the title is a deterrent, or I don't necessarily want to use the word negative, but maybe like holds back a bit.
Yeah, so it means complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think that's a pretty good name for it, because it is so complicated and it's so many different things for different people. But it, for me at least, is basically repeated and prolonged experiences of trauma or traumatic events. And so, in my case, it is extended childhood trauma that has reappeared in many aspects of my adult life because I didn't know that's what it was and it wasn't getting treated. And before I had my therapist, who basically was like, yeah, you have trauma, I wasn't getting the right treatment. So I've had a really great therapist, I've had a good therapist, and I've had a bad for me therapist. And so I was not seeing the right therapist, I wasn't getting the right type of treatment. And having them tell me, yeah, you have trauma was, I guess, a little relieving and also terrifying, because if I have to, I was going to say, if I have to have trauma, I don't have to have trauma, but if I have to admit that I have trauma, then it's like, oh gosh, I have to reevaluate all of these relationships in my life. And I have to acknowledge that they're not as nice as I'm working really hard to make out that they are. And so it was this like, okay, you have trauma. Now you can seek out a trauma therapist and you can do these treatment methods that are designed for trauma. And I think going back to the previous comment about treatment in different places, obviously my access to therapy depends on my insurance to some degree, but I had the freedom to be like, okay, this is a trauma therapist, I'm going to go see them. And it's different forms of therapy. To my understanding, the main type of therapy in the UK is CBT, which was not a method that was working for me at all. And then I saw a trauma therapist and was doing talk therapy and EMDR twice a week. And so it was like this like freeing thing of like, oh, okay, you've got anxiety, but you've also got this other thing that like covers everything else that's happening and makes a lot of things make sense. And you can seek out the right treatment. And also, oh, actually, that's really uncomfortable because that means a lot of things about what's happened to me. It means a lot of things about the people in my life. And I now have to deal with that. It's, you know, an ongoing process to not be like, yeah, my family did these things and that's not okay. And my brain being like, no, they didn't mean it. They didn't do it on purpose. It's like they were doing their best. And so it's like, I'm very okay with talking about my anxiety and have been for several years now. CPTSD has been a very different diagnosis in that it's meant the most to me in my treatment, but it's one that I don't talk about as much. Amy's blogathon, was the first time that I had talked about that publicly.
And now we have you on a podcast talking to everyone about it.
Yes. I think it's a good thing. It's like, that was the first step. And now it's like, yeah, we do need to talk about these things. And all of the shame that I feel around it is related to shame from my past. And if I talk about it, then everybody else can be like, oh, okay, we can't talk about this. Or like, it's not this thing that needs to stay hidden, like the stuff that caused it. We can talk about the causes. We can talk about what it is. We can talk about the diagnosis. So I think it's a good thing.
I think just for me, also being in that same boat, the diagnosis, while it's shame relieving in some ways, it's also shame inducing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of like walking this weird line of like, how much do you talk about it?
Right.
And then when you get over a little bit of shame, it just seems to have some more shame like hidden somewhere. Like, didn't know you were there. Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear your story. And just also, for those that don't know, CBD is cognitive behavioral therapy and EMDR is eye movement desensitization.
Yeah.
Rapid something.
Yes.
And I recently was watching when I go down the rabbit hole of reels on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and one of them popped up and it was a therapist, and she's like, you know, don't be ashamed if CBT doesn't work for you. And I was like, dude, why don't people say that more often? Because
Yeah.
You know why in the UK? Because it is the primary and usually only really accessible therapy treatment.
well,
It's
it
like
is, I
P5.
would say it is still the primary here, and it is the
Mhm.
most accessible here. It doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah.
And like,
And I
anyway,
think the problem is not necessarily like it being the first thing that someone like, that a medical professional will suggest.
Mhm.
But I think for a lot of people, it's felt that if it hasn't worked, then you've hit a brick wall. Like very rarely do they go, oh, do you know what? It's not worked for you. That's fine. Let's try this. You're made to feel like this is your option.
Yeah.
And,
well,
and
Which
if
is
it doesn't work, then that's it.
I think too, and I love that you brought that up, Jacqueline, that like you had a good therapist for you, and then you had a bad for you therapist. I really liked how you phrased that, because it's not necessarily that this person was a bad therapist, they just were not the right therapist for you.
Yeah.
And this is definitely putting you on the spot, and it's a weird turn of phrase, but can you maybe just talk a little bit more about like what it's like to date a therapist? Like
Mhm.
when it's such a weird turn of phrase, but like when you're trying to find a therapist, like, anyway, can you just talk some more about that a little bit?
Yeah, of
Try to come
course.
up with a better phrase for the next time I ask that question.
No, I think it's a really good phrase because as you were speaking, I wasn't sure exactly what you were going to ask me, but I was like, oh, we're going to talk about me breaking up with my therapist. And that was the phrase that was in my head. So I think it's a good term for it. But yeah, the first time that I was looking for a therapist, it was literally me and the internet and trying to figure it out. And so I didn't really know what I was looking for. I knew that I needed to see somebody about anxiety, and that they needed to be near me. And so I was just looking through profiles and being like, okay, this person seems fine. Let's give them a try. And so it's very much like, well, I can only say this as somebody who's got anxiety and stuff, but I was like before a first date, because you're so nervous and you're so anxious and you don't know what's going to be talked about, and you're worried about making a good impression and doing therapy right, as if there's a wrong way to do it. And then it's you and this person in a room and she's like, okay, we're gonna have these sessions, we're gonna do this intake, let's get to know each other. And much like you, like 9 sessions is going to do absolutely nothing for me because it's like, I don't know you in 9 sessions. Like, I am not comfortable with you. Like, you really want me to get into all of this, and we've got 9 sessions. It's just not happening. And I think for me, very quickly, I knew that this wasn't going to be the right therapist for me, but I didn't know how to break up with her. And I was so worried about letting her down. And she seemed so emotionally invested in me. And I understand that she was from like a professional perspective. But from my perspective, it was like, oh my gosh, she's being nice to me and she likes me. And I don't know what to do with this because I don't know how to be like, I don't think I can keep seeing you. And so it's like I kept going to therapy and was like, I don't know how to get out of this. But I would leave those sessions being like, this is doing nothing for me. I hate CBT because it just makes me feel awful about myself. And when she's like, yeah, let's think about the evidence that's not in favor of what you're feeling. And I'm like, well, I can tell you it, but it doesn't mean anything in my brain because my brain's just going to keep spiraling and find worse things about it. And so, yeah, in the end, I had to not tell her in person because I was just like, I can't do this. And I can't say it to your face. And so it's just like, yeah, I can't come in next week for the session. And then spent a lot of time being like, don't message me back, don't message me back. Like, just call it quits. Like, don't contact me ever. So yeah, that's a bit what it was like for me.
Yeah, my general rule of thumb is that it takes 6 to 9 months to know if a therapist is going to work for you. I mean, obviously, I think you know the people like right off the bat, like you said, where you just know it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
But I think there's always that middle ground, right? Where I think it takes 6 to 9 months for them to figure you out and how you process, and you to figure out them and how they process. But
For sure.
I think that's something that we need to talk about a lot more too.
As with the complexities of CPTSD, how does that help, or how does that help inform you on how to write your characters? Like, even if they're not necessarily suffering from the same diagnosis, like how do you draw from that in terms of your characters and their personalities and their stories?
As I mentioned before, bad family dynamics, huge part of my books. And I don't set out to make it that way. I haven't written a character who's got CPTSD. I've written characters who explicitly have anxiety and depression, but never CPTSD. And yet, if you read my books, it's in all of them, I think. I do a terrible job remembering exactly what I've written, but I am pretty sure that you could read them and be like, oh, CPTSD, because they're super internal, because I'm processing stuff on the page as I'm writing it. And I'm like, okay, we're going to write a nice, happy story. And then it's like, yeah, but this person's like mom is doing this thing and it's really uncomfortable. And it's been like that for their whole life. And so it's like, oh, okay, we're processing that. Got it. So yeah, everybody is very internal in my stories. I have received lovely and humorous comments about how much like internal dialogue there is between actual dialogue, and I'm just like, oh, that's just because that's how my brain works. So like you can say one sentence and I've got like 50 different things happening in my brain before I'll reply to you, and so that's happening for the characters. Yeah, they are processing the world, I think, in a fairly similar way to how I process it. No, none of my characters like have had exactly what I've got going on, because that would just be a little bit too close for comfort. But yeah, they are all processing stuff that's gone wrong. It's very often relationship based. And there is a lot of seeking approval, I think, from my characters, because I spend all of my time being like, I need everybody to like me, and I need to make it right, and I need to make sure I'm serving everybody. And so if a character is ever not like, it's such a weird term because it's not even possible, but like if they're not the perfect person, they're not being tidy and clean and nice, then I'm like, oh, but now I need to like write 3 pages of internal monologue so that they can fix this like terrible reaction they had, because I'm like, oh, but people are going to interpret it this way and that makes them a terrible person, and then like, what do I do? How do I make them better? So yeah, there's a lot of that goes on.
It's amazing how our characters, like, we relate to them so much, and yet we want them to be happy a lot of the times.
Yeah, just please be happy. And then I'm there like, but let me destroy your life with my thoughts.
You touched a little bit about putting mental health here and there in the story. And as authors and readers, we know that we're affected by story and narrative. We're in the business of creating an emotional reaction to a book. So what, out of curiosity, which book did you write that had an impact on your mental health like the most?
In the interest of transparency, I think it's worth saying that almost every book I've written, I end up having a breakdown over, because like I love to write, but it's so scary sometimes, like putting yourself out there, knowing that these bits of me are like sneaking into the books, and then being like, oh, what if everybody hates it? So I will usually end up crying on the floor over every book. But I think The Other Side of Leaving is probably the best example for like how one of them impacted my mental health. It was the first time that I tried actively to like navigate my need for acceptance and the voice in my head that is so worried about what the readers want. And of course I want them to enjoy the books and I want them to get the story that they want. But when I was writing the other side of leaving, Tilly, the main character, is dealing with her mental health and with like trying to figure out who she is and acceptance of herself. And so it was a version of me being like, okay, I am coming out of a couple of months of being quite ill, both mentally and physically, and I need to like deal with this. I need to have somebody who's going through some stuff and is finding acceptance. And I think it was the first book that I wrote that didn't have sex on page. Can I talk about this on here? Okay, cool. And before that, I had been like, okay, this is what we've got to do. We've got to have sex on page. And usually it was fine. And then I was writing The Other Side of Leaving. And as I was writing, I was like, I don't think they're going to have sex in this book. I don't think I can do it. I'm not like mentally in the place to be able to do this. I don't feel like it's working for the book. I don't feel like it's working for me. And I got all the way through the book. And then I was like, yeah, I haven't done this, but I feel like this is what readers want from me. So the epilogue, they have sex on the page. And I don't dislike the epilogue, but it's this like weird thing of like, I spent the entire book battling between like my mental health and my need and trying to think about what I thought readers wanted. And so, yeah, I don't know if it's kind of a weird epilogue or if it reads oddly. But yeah, it was a real battle for me of like, how do I navigate these two spaces? And feeling like I was kind of doing it. And then in the end, just being like, no, we've got to do it. We've got to put it in the epilogue. So we're going to do it now. And yeah, I have since written books. Almost every book I've written since then does not have sex on page. And so it was this lesson in like, okay, you don't feel totally okay with what happened there. So we're going to have to do it this other way.
I think that battle between what does the reader want and what do I want to write as the author and the writer is a battle that every single person who writes and publishes faces.
Mm-hmm.
And just, I mean, I'm coming off of this massive conference where, you know, everybody was talking about writing to market, et cetera, et cetera. And it is like, when we turn this into a business, I think that question enters into it even more. And it does get really complicated. You know, when you look at a romance novel, you have those beats that you have to hit. And a lot of people want to have sex on the page. And so I think you perhaps probably have it complicated even more in the sense that, you know, you self-identify as demisexual. And so that would not be your inherent inkling to do that and write that. And also just your self-stated of you want to please everybody, you know, kind of adds into that even more. And it just makes that conversation so much more complicated than it probably is for the average author. And I think readers probably don't think about that part of things at all.
Yeah, I didn't think about it before. Yeah, before I was writing, for sure, because I don't think you know before you're trying to do it. And then it's like, oh, okay, so if I'm going to write in the genre, then I need to know and do what is common and what readers expect from the genre. But yeah, it's complicated, but I write a lot of slow burn. I think I don't do it on purpose, but because I'm demisexual, I'm like, I need them to know each other really well before they're going to do anything. So it generally leads to a lot of slow burn.
I personally love slow burns and I write a lot of them too. There was a time that I questioned whether or not I was demisexual. I think I've come to the conclusion I'm not. but I do have demisexual tendencies because of my sexual trauma as a child. And so it makes me very wary of anything sexual going on. And I think that's why I appreciate slow burn so much, because I'm like, yeah, why would I be jumping into bed with this person? Like, oh, thank you.
Right.
So speaking of that, when we come to writing with complex diagnoses such as CPTSD and anxiety, it often feels as though these diagnoses are our best friends that we never wanted. Like kind of the invisible friend that follows us around. So I'm curious how your mental health impacts your writing process, particularly when you're having rough mental health days like those, and just in general as well.
It's the battle between feeling too broken to do anything and being too anxious to not to do it. And so, you know, there are definitely days where I am like, okay, I need to write, and it's just not happening. And sitting in front of the page is so painful because nothing is happening and nothing is coming. And if there are any words on that page, they are not worth reading. They are not worth keeping. And the story is probably taking a turn. I mean, stories take a lot of turns we don't necessarily plan, but these are taking turns that don't need to be there. But I'm just so anxious about it that stepping away really isn't a possibility, or well, it is. It just doesn't feel like it is. I think a huge part of my history, I guess is the right word for it, is this expectation that I will do everything that people want me to do. And the consequences of not doing those things have been bad. They have been, you know, like, well, they've been traumatic, let's be honest. And so it's this real fear that's so overwhelming on the days where the words won't come, because my spiral is, I haven't written anything today, or what I've written I need to get rid of. Okay, so the book's not happening, the book's not going forward, the book's not going to come out in time. I'm like, nobody's ever going to read my books again. I'm going to end up destitute and not making any money. And then, like, literally, I'm going to die on the street. And I know that this isn't real, and it's still happening. And so, yeah, I'm not like a huge planner. I'm a bit more pantser than planner, which I guess is helpful because then it's like, okay, the story can take these turns. But when it comes to scheduling, I want to be there every day, putting all of these words on page, and don't know how to take a break, and generally need assistance in being like, okay, you're falling apart right now. So like, let's go get a drink, let's get some food, let's lie down with a blanket, like, and every part of me is like, no, I'm okay. I just need 1 second and then I'm going to get back to it. So yeah, I don't think it's the tidiest writing process anyone's ever had, but it's basically me doing my best to get those words down.
I feel very called out right now.
I'm so sorry.
I know. AJ's probably sitting there just going, sounds like someone else I spoke to the other week, which was basically, that was my process as well.
But also I feel really called out because I've been trying to finish this book since like the end of August.
I'm so sorry.
And I've literally had 5 chapters left since the end of August, and we're now almost like halfway through, we're over halfway through November, and it's still not done. But it seems like to me just that you're, whether it's a process that you're working on or whatever, but that you're becoming more self-aware of your needs when it comes to writing. Because I think for a lot of us, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but for a lot of us writers, we use writing as a coping mechanism and as an escape and as income, which I'm pretty sure every single one of our therapists would tell us, do not do that. But we did it anyway.
That's a bad life plan, isn't it? Like, let's just like, we've got one thing, and we're gonna just hang like mental well-being and income and everything else which we possibly need to survive. We're just gonna hang off this one thing, and it will be fine. I don't see the problem with that plan. What's wrong?
There's one thing, that's running your own business, that's working from home and being self-employed, and trying to like be an entrepreneur all at the same time. Yeah, definitely. Perfect plan right there.
Yep.
No flaws in that whatsoever.
Oh my gosh.
Then
Anyway,
also you have to do all the advertising as well. So like make sure that people see you, make sure you talk to everybody.
yep, you have to talk to everybody. You have to be nice. You can't say a bad thing. You have to like be pleasant. I went to I was at the 20 Books to 50K in Vegas conference last week, and I went to this workshop panel, whatever thing, on in-person sales, and the guy said, you need to make your permanent face a smile. And I was like, I have some choice words for you, and I don't think you would appreciate hearing them.
Yeah, no, some days there's no smile to be had, and that's okay. Like,
Unless you're doing in-person sales, in which case you do need to somehow.
apparently.
This is why I go do in-person sales. Anyway, we have come to towards the end of our podcast, and we do a rapid fire with every single guest. And so we have, I think, 5 questions to ask you rapid fire. So come up with the first answer that you can think of that is preferably appropriate and somewhat relevant. And some of them are going to make you have to think a little bit harder than the beginning ones. So we start off easy and then we get harder as we go.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. What is your favorite source of caffeine?
Oh, I don't drink caffeine. I'm low-level allergic.
We did not screen these guests well enough. That's like the second or third.
Please
So sorry.
Questions ahead of time.
I do love tea, but it's decaffeinated.
It's okay. You can have decaffeinated tea. That's fine. What's your dream destination vacation?
Norway for the Northern Lights.
Ooh.
My congregant has spent the last 3 weeks there. I've really enjoyed their pictures.
Oh, nice.
Jealous. Anyway, where did you see kindness today?
I just literally forgot everything that happened to me my whole day. I'm so sorry.
I had the thought that we're not doing this interview at like 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Oh, Lily was super, super nice and called me right before we connected to this call, because she knew I was going to be really, really anxious, because I'm an anxious person. So that was really kind.
Really kind.
That's cute.
What is your philosophy on good mental health?
One that I believe in, or one that I prescribe to. I think just show up the way that you can. Like, find what's working for you and do it the best you can. Like, some days you're going to give it 100%, and some days you're going to give it 1%, and you're doing the best you can, and just acknowledge that that's all you've got, but it's what you've got and you did your best.
And finally, where did you find joy this week?
I love it when people ask me questions about myself and my whole brain goes blank every single time. Oh, I I play a TTRPG game, and that was so fun. We wrapped up a huge part of the campaign this week, and we were all having so much fun, and there was a lot of laughter and joy to be had there.
Okay, so educate me. What is that?
Oh, do you know Dungeons and
But what's the?
It's like role playing, isn't it? Like
I know what RPG
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, so like Dungeons and Dragons, but we play thirsty sword lesbians.
I knew there was more to it. It was those letters before the RPG.
Before the RPG.
Yeah, tabletop role-playing games, and we play thirsty sad lesbians, so it's quite a soft and squishy group. So it's just lots of magic and adventures and people swooning over characters in the game.
Booning over thirsty lesbians. I got it.
Yes.
All right, so that's all for our latest episode of Books and Unbalanced, and we would love to thank Jacqueline for being here with us today and sharing so much of her story. And so we want to also thank our listeners for tuning in and getting to know Jacqueline. So be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to keep up to date with our latest episodes. And until next time, take care out there, and remember that we're all in this together. And if you have paper, Jacqueline, at the very end of every episode, we throw paper.
Oh, great. Okay.
All I had were Post-it notes.
It's fine, because by like episode, I don't know, 472, we might have this down. It'll be absolutely fine and smooth and seamless.